My name is Josh. Some people call me JG. And I started a company called Green Mountain Lodge recently that is helping, it's a little nebulous of a concept, but it's basically helping people at the intersection of music, culture, technology, and brand to connect in new ways with the ecosystem around them, both natural, communal, and sort of contextually in different ways. And I know that sounds a little broad, but it actually goes to the topic that I'm sort of referencing here, which is about persona. So I consciously think about what I'm doing as a hotel concierge, right? So it's every person that comes to me and works with me requires something different, and they have a different cultural reference that they're looking for. They have different needs, and based on a background that I have, which I was privileged to spend 14 years at Red Bull working in brand and music for them on an international level, and then the last 3 years I worked on brand and creative at Spotify, building what the offline brand for Spotify meant. And then now I've started my own firm. I have a lot of kind of alternative ways to think about things. And I think persona is an interesting thing when we specifically talk about music technology. And I'll kind of go into that. So how many people in this room work in the music industry? Okay, so it's about half, right? So this here is the product that we sell, right? Like sometimes people don't love hearing that because it's an emotional thing, but realistically that's the product that's available, right? But this is also the culture at large. This is the community that's a part of that. Now, how many people are in music technology? Okay, so you might not like me as much on this one, right? Because music technology in its function is functional. It's usually informative and it's usually individual, right? It's not necessarily at its native or nascent state shared. And you might not like the term, but without the prior slide, it's just tech. It's not music tech. And so everything that we build as technology on top of music is an exploitation of the product, is an exploitation of the culture, or is an exploitation of the community. And sometimes the people inside the music industry see the tech industry as exactly that, unless you can change their mind using persona. So taking something from product to brand, when you think of this device on screen, there's a functional thing here, right? Like I might use laundry detergent, but specifically I buy Tide or whatever the brand is, wherever I'm at. And I'm not buying an Amazon Echo for its speaker quality. Sorry to say it. I'm buying an Echo because of Alexa. And this is the most real manifestation of a persona in a product that's existed to date. And obviously Siri, achieving the same thing, and Google Assistant, but you get a very particular experience from Alexa to the point that kids say, I want to take Alexa on vacation, or can Alexa read me a bedtime story, or Alexa cooks dinner with me, right? What other technologies can you think of that have a persona that actually has a human participation in that experience with you? And I think, the evolved iteration of this thing is everybody's seen, or not everybody, anyone's seen Spike Jonze's movie Her, right? Joaquin Phoenix is basically in a relationship with his AI. And I mean, that's a dangerous state of that. But to the point is that when we're talking about music, first and foremost, is that people have personal human relationships with and in service of music. But who is it that they interact with when it comes to music technology? And I think that's not normally a question that we ask ourselves because we don't think of who the persona is that we're there exploring. So I did a kind of interesting exercise for myself, and by no means did I cover every single vertical, but I did a exercise talking about personas. So when I think of secondary ticketing, I think of Mike Damone from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, basically trying to huck cheap trick tickets, singing Surrender to people, to high school kids. It's not necessarily the most glamorous setting, but that's my cultural point of reference when I think of persona. Or Discovery and Purchase, I think of Rob Gordon, John Cusack, and High Fidelity saying he's going to sell 5 copies of the Beta Band's new record in the next 3 minutes with confidence, right? Or Analytics, it's Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, kind of getting a little nebulous with reference. Or it's Web Services, and it's Dennis Nedry from Jurassic Park with his big gulp sitting behind a computer giggling hilariously as he rakes money in the door. Or instruction, it's an over-enthused Jack Black, right? That's super excited to talk about it. Or streaming, sorry, Spotify, it's the wizard behind the wall, and actually behind the wall, it's not that pretty, it's just a facade. Or blockchain, it's the janitor in Matt Damon, who's this whiz kid that can fucking somehow explain how blockchain works, right? So I think, there's kind of 2 points to this, and this goes to science, and I actually think that the Here Dist guys did a pretty good job of explaining some of this in an interesting way, and that's that in two parts. One, I totally understand that you guys in this room might not know all the films that I referenced, right, in that thing. So if not, homework. And then on a secondary thing, those were all white men for the most part, right? And contextual reference for most people might say that it's hard to find other solutions to do that. So this is called stereotyping or cognitive bias. But actually, it goes a bit further, and not that you need to read the words here because it gets a little verbose, but the point being, and again, go talk to the Here Dist guys. I don't have my PhD in musicology, but is that cultural reference means a lot when it comes to your ability to identify the connection with the product that you're talking about. And the thing that this group needs to understand is when I talk about product versus exploitation, we actually operate more in music technology in the business of music and business, not in the business of isolated technology. And that's really important to understand when you're talking about your point of cultural reference and thinking about persona. So the definition of persona is as such, and I think the second line is really important, right? It's a role or a character adopted by an author or an actor. In this case, your music technology is an author trying to engage that product, trying to engage that community, trying to engage that culture. And you have a role, you have a part, you have an exterior, but oftentimes I don't think people necessarily think of that role or that part that they play. And in common context from the tech space, I tend to see people first start with, let's identify the personas of our customer, right? Our consumer. Who is the person that we're trying to work with, and let's identify them. But I can tell you one thing, like no woman on Tinder is gonna date me until I fill out my profile, right? So if I haven't figured out who I am first and put that on the thing, if I'm Dennis Nedry, I'm not that attractive, right? Maybe John Cusack, that's probably a little bit more me. But I have to figure out who I am, put myself up there, and then people want to interact with me and potentially sleep with me. Wedding ring, sorry. Sorry, Laura. But needless to say, I think that's something important to think about because you do need to define who you are first before you define who you're serving from an audience. So a couple of exercises to think about, right? First, when you're talking about who am I, the user, and that user could be artist, that could be management, that could be label, that could be publisher, that could be consumer, venue, whatever business you're in, I think this is broadly applicable exercises to think about. Is first, who am I interacting with? If your business is about providing financial services to the music sector, my frame of reference is a banker, right? Do you want to be a guy in a suit behind the desk serving your client? If yes, great, lean into that. Know that that's the case and kind of allow people to do that. But if not, if that's not the way you want to be perceived, you have to think consciously about your persona to change people's perception because they're utilizing cultural reference to define you as such. And the same thing, sorry to say it, but if you're in the social media space, I perceive a 23-year-old in a hoodie with Balenciaga sneakers on. Sorry, Ted. That's drinking their juice and trying to sell me on something that's a bit of a soft metric. And if that's not who you want to be in social media, then you have to think about persona to reposition that. So, whatever business you're in, I like talking about the guy in the top right corner as he's a platform, right? He's lifting someone up. Think consciously about the persona that you are and what role you play. Define a few personality traits, right? Come up with 7 or 8 things off of this specific list or whatever list you can find that you can hold yourself accountable to, right? So like, not that you have to be 8 or 9 things all the time, but you should probably be 4 or 5. You use them in your own life to define who you are, but think about that through the lens of your tech. Like, what are the personality traits of my tech? And you'll start to think about some really interesting things when it comes to UX, UI, tone of voice, etc. What do you believe in? Cher tells us what she believes in. She believes in love after love. But, not to say that this is religion, but it is a bit of a moral compass. Come up with like 3 or 4 statements that you can hold yourself against and say, would I do this? Do I believe in this? If this great opportunity comes across that's like a great money-making venture, yeah, your VC might want you to do that, but is it really what your persona would do? Not necessarily you as an individual, but would your product make this decision? Right? As a fun exercise, depending on what business you're in, I like to think of my persona of where I would be at the show, right? So if I'm in the business of helping artists present their work, am I on stage next to the artist with the crowd down there looking at me in the lights to a point that I'm actually taking potential attention away from the artist in presenting their art? Or am I side stage making sure that if his guitar string breaks, that I can run out and give him a new guitar so that he can present his art in the right way? Or maybe I'm at front of house and I spent the last 4 or 5 hours making sure that the way I'm lit and the way that I sound is great, but actually when the show comes up, I don't have to do a lot of work, right? So it's the persona that you're thinking about, and doing an exercise like this can help you frame a little bit of reference. Maybe you're not even there at all because your business is about audience analytics, and you don't even need to be at the show. You're actually sitting at home wondering how people are engaged following the show. So when you think about your tech product or your music, I challenge you to think about what character you would reference. Go through the movie thing if that's your first point of reference. Think about the characters in the world that you have as your cultural reference. And if it doesn't exist, that's okay. The point here is to actually build one, right? And it's to, in some cases, it might be you, but if it is you, does your consumer know that it's you? Right? Probably not. And so if you have a sassy tone of voice and your technology has a sassy tone of voice to it, great, fine. But your technology can have a sassy tone of voice and you can be soft-spoken in the background. It just depends on what role you play, and you need to be conscious about that on the front end. And I challenge that this is a major lever that once you define this, you can pull for your business. You can think about it through these things I've been talking about: UX, UI, tone of voice, communications, customer service, sales strategy, much more, right? And if you can figure out clearly who you are, not only do you want to be you, but you want to be you in a crowd of other people that are trying to offer the same services you are. I want to stand out on Tinder. So I'm going to think about how other people are positioned on Tinder and maybe try and be a little something different, right? And so that's definitely a point of reference to think about. And actually, when you get down to the attribution and the metrics of this, and you talk about, for anybody that's, in the financial space in here, obviously this is part of what you're measuring, but, interactive and performative metrics, these are things that might not be shaped by persona, right? You're not necessarily talking about reach or frequency or purchase intent or market share, things like that related to this. But sure as hell, when you're talking about behavioral metrics and you talk about your employees' ability to understand your strategy, to communicate that strategy to other people effectively, customer service, communications, et cetera, and in particular, when you think about perceptual metrics like range of awareness or sphere of reference, or I'm blanking on a few of these things. This is why I had my fucking notes. But to that point, these things are definitely measurable changes that you can see when you insert a strategy like this on the front end of what you're doing. So, all of this to be said that it's intended to help you accelerate your journey from trial to belief. And then obviously the core goal is about sharing. And if I want to go, like I just sat backstage with Ted and he was telling me 10 different stories. You should sit with him at dinner, but 10 different stories about certain people and personalities in the music business that he interacts with. We're not talking about the technology, we're talking about people, right? And so if you want somebody to talk about your product, think about who they talk about, not what they talk about, all right? So I challenge to kind of ask the question, like, think of your technology and think of who's inside. And if for some reason you're struggling to find that, you can find me here, and I can help you with it. So thank you guys so much for the time. Here's my information. Look forward to speaking with you guys later. I think we're going to not do questions right now. Sorry, because we're a little late on time, but I think they're going to pick up with the next speaker here right away. So I'll be around all night. Look forward to speaking with you. Thanks.